So, welcome to episode 14. I'm joined with Veronika Harmish. She is a local to Ukraine. We actually met at TEDxU Alberta. I want to say that was 2023.
I believe so, yeah. Must be.
Yeah. Yeah. Which was amazing because you were the MC and, it was my first experience
Mm.
at a TEDx event. And so much of, what brought us together, seeing you on stage and like picking up on like your accent and everything. And then following up, going for coffee and hearing your entire story was nothing short of incredible, educational. And I'm very appreciative to have you on today.
Yes, thank you. Good to be here, and thank you for inviting. I hope I can tell something that people will hopefully be interested in to hear.
Yeah, I would love for you to share with the audience of like who you are, what brought you to Canada, and then kind of like your whole journey, even like your story of everything that has kind of unfolded over the last few years with everything in Ukraine as well.
Yeah, TEDx feels like a lifetime ago, but that's when I was when I was in Canada. It was from 2022 to 2023. I did my master's there. So if we scroll back even a bit more, I'm a specialist in communications, and I did my undergrad here in Kyiv, in Ukraine, Shevchenko National University. I did journalism, and then from there, I kind of navigated to communications better. So basically, like a journalism, but more on the business side. But I always also was interested in topics of women's rights and human rights and social justice, and how we can better maybe implement it in different areas of what we do, like not necessarily as a separate field, but more of a red line that goes through all the like all the occupations and whatever people do in their life, how we can do better social justice there. So this is what brought me to Canada. I've always wanted to study abroad. And when the full-scale war in Ukraine started in 2022, because prior to that, we already had a war since 2014, but it was primarily in Donbas region, which is East Ukraine. And of course, the Crimea was annexed. But then the full-scale, which many people know about, started in 2022. So when that happened, I was in Portugal doing my program. So if any like Europeans, especially Ukrainians, listen to this, they know ISAC program is like for young professionals. I did an internship in business development there, and I was supposed to go home to Kyiv on March 3rd, 2022, but then the full scale started on the end of February 2022. So I never went home, kind of got stuck in Portugal, which until this day I'm still joking is not the worst place to be stuck in, but it felt like it was at the time. Of course, I was stressed, and those first few weeks, months were terrible, especially with all my family and friends being here in Ukraine, me trying to navigate through phone, like their relocation or something. And I was just basically in their way, being abroad and safe. But yeah, after all of that, like first stress settled down, I found myself like I am abroad for now, and I don't know what comes next. And I always wanted to study abroad, so I was like, might as well use the chance and like apply to different schools. I don't know if it's safe to go home anytime soon anyway. So this is how I came to Canada, applied to multiple schools in the UK and Canada, and then got into one of them, which was U of A. And it was actually a school. I have a lot of things to be like grateful for the school, but the first one was that they accepted me for a scholarship, even though I did, like, you could say, discipline switch, like interdisciplinary studies, switching from journalism to gender and social justice, which was my major. So yeah, this is when it all started in Canada. I got into a program called Gender and Social Justice in the Department of Women and Gender Studies, and did my master's in master's research into how we can better reintegrate women with war-related trauma into the workplaces. So like I said, something I'm interested in, like in between communications, internal communications, maybe somewhere even drops of HR here, and women's rights. And of course, with my Ukrainian background, I wanted to look into war-related trauma. I did my master's there and came back to Ukraine afterwards, because initially, I never wanted to immigrate. It was just an experience of studying abroad for me. And after spending a year and a half in Canada, I returned to Kyiv and to live here until now. I work in communications, in education, and in civil society fields. I have two major projects I'm involved with. Civil society project is where we work with NGOs who work in South and East Ukraine, and they have their little projects in different areas, like from medicine to education to reconstructions in some places, and I help them communicate those projects. And the other education is we help Ukrainian high schoolers who are academically successful but are from modest backgrounds get into Western boarding schools and university for a full scholarship. So those are the two projects. Mine both are like in social area, but I'm passionate about both, and this is where I'm at now.
Amazing, amazing. And just out of sheer curiosity, based on women's rights and everything that's actively happening in Ukraine, where do you see opportunities in that area particularly? Is there anything that comes up for you?
Do you mean professionally for me to like work in this area more?
Or even just like within your community, within just
Mm.
like women in general in the Ukraine particularly?
Yeah, so I'm like, I'm not saying that with an easy heart, like the situation is not the best currently, because, and thankfully, in many ways, this is not my experience, but from many people whom I talk to, it is mainly influenced, of course, by war and by the partners who have been to war and have this traumatic experience. Then they come back from the battlefield, and this is where women can oftentimes get hurt, get like their partners can get violence. So the overall situation, like it's a huge throwback. We had the first throwback during the COVID times, and now an even bigger one during the full-scale invasion. I would say that is one of the points. Second one is even prior to the partner's return, woman has to take up the breadwinner's role, which is for many women in our culture a not typical thing to do. Women are brought up to be more, of that classic gender role, like stay-at-home mom, full-time wife, and that kind of stuff. A path women choose for themselves, but then everything dramatically changes because, for instance, their partner gets drafted. That is also a challenging thing. Also because our labor market is not adapted for women. That is one of the things I looked into during my research. There is no flexible work hours many times. There is no daycare on site, which is the first thing women ask for is daycare. Employers are not very mindful of women with kids, or not even necessarily with kids. Like they are often a sole care provider at this point, like older relatives and that kind of stuff. And then there is a huge chunk of which I don't feel like I'm I don't know, qualified enough to talk about deeper, but I will mention them for sure. It's women in the army. Like they have completely different experience starting from when their uniform doesn't fit them because we don't have like women crafted uniform for like the breasts to fit in, or we don't have any hygiene products provided by the army because the army is financed from the state, but everything was designed for men to fight, like for only men to fight. So definitely they have their challenges. Not sure even where to start there, so maybe not the focus for now. But yeah, a close friend of mine is going to get drafted. How do you say it in English? Like you get drafted is when the state initiates you go to the army, but how do you call it when you are the one initiating? Is there a specific word for that?
You apply, you enroll.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so probably
And then you end up
she
being
will just
deployed.
roll and sign the contract. So a little worried for her, but maybe in a few months she'll share some experience and I'll be happy to follow up. But yeah,
Yeah,
not the best situation for sure now.
not at all. And going back to just the women, let's say in the inner city or even the frontline communities, I can only imagine, well, their husbands and all the males are gone.
Mm.
They're put on their shoulders to do the caretaking. And I know last time I recall, I believe some of the daycares were open, but a lot of the schools have been closed as well. So it makes it extremely difficult for creating this education gap
Hmm.
while, the women are also trying to put food on the table. I think, yeah, also we talked about it as well. The cost of living hasn't gone down as well. If anything, in Kyiv, it's actually gone up.
Gone up for sure. Yes. Educational loss is also a different topic, which is also sad. I'm sorry, but this episode will probably will be mostly sad in many ways. Sure, we do have international support. For instance, like one of the projects I'm involved with, they work in some ways with educational losses. But it can only help so much. Like the frontline moves, the more people need support, and it's all very complicated because let me try to explain that. So there is this like the front line and the regions that are close to the front line. And many people, they are chosen to stay in those dangerous regions because this is where like preliminarily the international help is at. So the international organizations, when they come here, they usually don't provide help in central and western regions because they are considered relatively safe. They all go to south and east. And then, for instance, let's say you are a mom with 2 kids in Zaporizhia region, where the front line is like right there. Let's say your village is 30 to 20 kilometers from the front line. You wouldn't want to go anywhere safer, like let's say Lviv, because there you will get no support, also including the educational losses. And while staying in a more dangerous zone, you are getting at least some international support. And this is the paradox of it all. So with the kids, it is challenging. And it's also not just a matter of like aligning everything with my mom's working schedule. It's also oftentimes the gadget issue, because families that are less privileged and of lower income, they simply don't have the tablets, the laptops. And again, there are international grants and support, but it like can't cover all the families, and that is obvious. So many kids, they have to go to online education. School cannot provide them with the gadget, and family can't, and they just are being left out. And also the weather conditions don't help. I'm sure this like how is it this winter in Canada actually? I never had a chance to ask. Is it rough?
Yeah. December, we got 500 times more the amount of snow than we typically have.
Yeah.
And this January going into February has been extremely warm, but the
Mm,
east, Toronto area, and I believe along the east coast of the US as well, has gotten,
yeah.
it's been quite cold. So it kind
Yeah,
of
they've
like
had a few
switched a little
snowstorms.
bit. Yeah.
Right, because in Europe, this winter is an anomaly. I spent a few weeks staying with my friends in Portugal, and they would have storms every day. It's an anomaly, and same here in Ukraine. It is an incredibly cold winter, which, like I said, it doesn't help both to the soldiers in the front line, also to the kids. Because even if your school is offline, it's oftentimes simply difficult to get there because the roads get frozen and our cities and city administration don't handle well enough the cleaning, and the transport just doesn't work. And even let's not even mention the rural areas here. Even in Kiev now, all the electric transport is stopped. Like it doesn't work because of the power outages. So they cannot launch those like electric buses, and we all had to switch again. If any Ukrainians are listening to marshrutkas, which is a very Ukrainian thing, it's like public bus, but it's privately operated. So usually it's worse and more expensive than the public transfer from the city. But we did have to switch to those because they are like gas fueled rather than electric. And in many ways, this is the only option. So like obstacles come from all the ways, and in terms of like women handling it and education for kids, and you know for women as well, like an extended education, it's gotten way harder, if not to say impossible these days.
And I remember when I was in Ukraine, I stayed at a hotel house, and the
Mm,
owner, he was lovely. He worked in IT. So obviously he had a job that he can work remotely. Obviously, he can't leave being a male, right?
right.
Every once in a while I check in, and he seems, you can feel the stress, you can feel the tension, right? Just because it's never really good news. But I remember his niece was graduating, and I was just visualizing just the thought of the air sirens happening so often, and there were frequent attacks even in the time that I was there. And so just to think about when you're trying to get a formal education and you have this constant limiting thought that something could happen at any time, it's just, yeah, it's not good for the system.
No, no. And it interrupts the education often. Like the school hour itself is not long. It's 45 minutes here in Ukraine, and you can just start the lesson, just start like covering the topic, even if your school again is offline, which is a huge privilege in in-person school. Like the siren would sound, everybody has to go down to the shelter. It's just, it is terrible. And all the educational research shows that the overall level of education keeps like going down dramatically in the last couple of years, just because all of what we just discussed, and added on stress, it adds up and shows that kids are just on the physical level comprehending like information has become more difficult for them. So but still, the kids who we work with, they are very inspirational, and I admire them so much. I just had again, the privilege of going to the US with the organization I'm involved with, and they showed us a few schools they are attending. Like, for instance, the two of those we went to are Harvard and MIT. This is just regular thing for them. And one of the kids, for instance, he mentioned that, oh, this is not very hard to get in MIT. They are not so essay picky. They look more at your grades and your international Olympiads. And I just laughed at him, like, because he won 3 international Olympiads in chemistry, like 3 internationals. And he's saying here it's not very hard to get to MIT, which is funny at the moment. But I feel like an imposter when I'm with them, but also very, very inspirational. And those are kids from Ukraine. They are from 16 to like 18, 19 years, which means it's been 4 years of full scale and then 2 years of COVID. Many of them were just finished in primary school when COVID hits. There are ways, it's not easy.
And it's interesting how there's a whole generation that's been almost adjusted to it, like that's been their normal. I think that's the biggest thing I think about is when, and I hope soon, when the war ends, the support and the work and the healing that needs to be done
Right.
once everything stops and hopefully consistently ends.
Yeah, we're talking lots about Ukraine needing the recovery right now, not even after the war ends, because first of all, nobody knows if and when it will. We can only hope, but realistically, like living here, you kind of have to make action now. Because even like thinking back to the women we discussed, like they need to get the help and support right now. Because if they don't, we will get a full generation of another full generation of traumatized women. This is one of the areas I'm also interested in if I do my PhD, which I hope I do. I want to look into intergenerational trauma because if you look at the 20th century, and there was the Holodomor, which is man-made famine by the USSR government on the territory of Ukraine. Then there was First World War, Second World War, and now there is a current war with Russia. And all of those usually were families and care providement was carried on women's shoulders. So I want to look into how all of those traumas reflect current women's work patterns, and not only, but I also wanted to say that we will have a new generation of traumatized women and a new intergenerational trauma, which they will unfortunately, but are most likely to pass on to their kids and the next generation. If they don't get support now, we just don't have a privilege to wait till the end. And also, at this point, it's very hard to consider what kind of end would be acceptable for us. Is it like when mass drafting stops, or is it when we return to the borders of 1991, which Ukraine gained its independence from USSR? Which end are we considering an end to start healing? So I feel like it is necessary to help people right now, and specifically those less privileged and more marginalized, like
Mhm.
women we're focusing on here now, and people from rural communities, and people um who what is it this word in English again, like when they have many kids in one family. In Ukrainian we call it multi-kids family.
Yeah, multi-family household.
Yeah, and like with the cost of living going up, like you said, here in Kiev, it has been expensive. Like again, I just spent a few weeks in Portugal and spending on groceries less than I do here in Kiev. I understand that like the businesses have to cover the risks because every now and then we would have their warehouses and storages bombed and they would lose lots and lots of money. But then the weight of it lays on people's shoulders. And also, we had the military tax increase recently, for instance, for private entrepreneurs from 1.5% to 6%. And I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that I see why it has to be done. But of course, eventually, the cost of living is more expensive these days. And as usual, it hits the most protected ones, which is
And I
sad.
just remember when I was in Ukraine and exploring Irpin and that particular region that was hit heavily at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and seeing people walking with grocery bags, and buildings are, there's holes in buildings and some are like, down to rubble. And after talking to you and saying, yeah, they've actually rebuilt all of that. Like that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that the land isn't worth something, which I thought was so interesting. But, and then also, too, going there and learning, McDonald's and all these like chain restaurants are closed because they don't want to risk, but still people are risking their lives transporting food. And also, when the outages would happen, that means the refrigeration isn't working. And so there's a lot of food waste that goes in it too. So I'm sure the value of food has gone up because of that as well.
Yeah, 100%. I know that in some private schools, again, an intersection of education here, then in some private schools, they would even charge parents more if there are many outages and they had to cook food with the generator because they would have to fuel the generator and it is expensive. But I don't know if it's a mass case, but there are some schools that practice that. And again, like it's hard to criticize here because on the one hand, like you are a business, you have to survive in some ways, which is challenging in Ukraine these days. But then on the other hand, it's always the people who get hurt most, if you can say get hurt in the financial discussion, but I guess you could. And by the way, the McDonald's works not everywhere. It is back. Many businesses returned. I watched an interview of McDonald's CEO recently, and she said that Ukraine was the first country that wrote and implemented the protocol because McDonald's is very like rule driven corporation. And Ukraine was the first case in the world when they had to write the protocol of reopening a restaurant during the wartime, because they did have a protocol of how to close the restaurant, but nobody expected that we would have to reopen again. So they wrote the protocol, and now all the countries in the world have it. If something happens, wow, and there will be a local conflict, they will be following a Ukrainian protocol of reopening McDonald's, hopefully. It's not working in all the cities, and it's not just about McDonald's. It's about many international brands like Inditex Network. I don't know if it's big in Canada, but in Europe it is. It's where the all holding of like Zara, H&M, those kind of mass clothing. They are open a list in Kyiv, but if you go to Dnipro, which is the city I'm from, they are roughly 80 to 100 kilometers from the front line. Their Inditex doesn't work, McDonald's works. If you take Kharkiv, which is, I'm afraid to be wrong here, but I think they are like 30 to 50 kilometers from the front line. I'd have
They're
to look it
right
up
on the
though.
border.
There, neither networks work. So it is, again, up to business. Where do they want to reopen and under which conditions? And it's always the risks on them. Slowly but steadily, we live somewhat of a normal life, which is of course far from normal, but somehow we handle. This is one of my favorite phrases recently. Somehow we handle.
Yeah. Well, speaking from personal experience, I've never
Mm-hmm.
been to a country under war, active
Mm-hmm.
war, but from going there and experience it and people watching and just picking up on, body language, it is pretty remarkable how and scary how normalized it's become. Obviously under sad circumstances, but also incredible about how strong and resilient the human spirit is.
Yes, it is funny and weird at the same time because when I talk to my parents, they are in Dnipro. My dad is currently serving. My
Still.
mom works an administrative job, and I admire her. She like truly believes is important, and she basically just like works with papers and like a local administration. But I agree, she says it's a very important job for everybody to keep doing what they do. But I was going to say that when I'm talking to them, of course, I'm worried because in Dnipro, they would get more attacks than we do in Kiev. Here in Kiev, you would get a few attacks every week, like 2 to 3, I would say, on average, depending on the week. If there are any negotiations and Russians would want to play pretend like a peaceful and fair negotiator, they wouldn't bomb us. But if there is nothing happening on international area, we could have like an attack every day. So I would say, yeah, on average 2 to 3 a week. In Dnipro, it's almost every day because there is a different kind of ammunition when it is closer to the front line. They can use those like cheaper ammo and it's not ammo, it's weapons, sorry. The kind of cheaper weapons and strike them more often with like ballistics, and they call it C300, C400. We're all experts in weapons and ammunition at this point in Ukraine. But yeah, I call them and I'm worried about them. but they say, we're okay. They are finishing their renovation in the apartment, which is just like next door to the power producing plant, which is like the very target for Russian army. They're just almost like pretending to live a normal life, but I know they truly do. And it's hard to like even judge or like even comment on this one, because to me, their situation is worse. For somebody who's not from Ukraine, like it is ridiculous how we live here in Kiev as well. And every time like you go closer and closer to the front line, you feel like nobody can adapt to that, but people do. So it
Mm-hmm.
is scary also. And here in Kiev, like this winter was specifically hard. Like I said, I didn't have an experience of first two full-scale war winters here because I was abroad. But when I came, like first for me, but third full-scale winter was more or less, manageable. But this winter was really, really bad. We would sometimes have outages for like 20 to 30 hours straight. And we have those batteries, which are expensive now to purchase, but everybody does. And you can survive like 5 to 10 hours on them, depending how big your battery is. But when the outage lasts for like multiple days, nobody, and I shouldn't be saying nobody, very few people are prepared for that kind of outage. Just maybe some administrative buildings, somebody who has to function. So yeah, it is interesting how humans' brain works. My therapist jokes that there is this like brain institute, I think, in the Netherlands. And she said, like, as a therapist, as a person who's like researching brain and interested in how humans' brain works, so to that institute, an important thing to mention, you can volunteer to donate your brain to that institute after you die for, exploring and learning humans' brain if there was something interesting to your life to explore and to research. If you're just a regular, ordinary person, living your ordinary life, dying from heart attack, they wouldn't be interested in your brain. So my therapist says, I always wanted to send my brain to them, like to donate it to science, but she's lived a regular life. Now she jokes that she doesn't, she doesn't live a regular life here in Kiev. So they might as well want to take her brain after she dies and explore all the chemical processes, because I'm pretty sure there is lots to explore. I don't know if we are experiencing even 10% of what's happening.
And that's such a great topic to get into, and I've been deep diving myself. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine being in that fight or flight, your amygdala is constantly activated.
Hmm.
Mm. I don't know like the long-term effects on how
Yeah.
that impacts, but it is very interesting as I've studied quite a bit on how social media impacts the brain. Like the
Right.
dopamine takes you away from the prefrontal cortex, so we actually lose empathy. And then when you see intense, stressful, repetitive
Hmm.
messaging that triggers the nervous system, that gets that fight or flight going as well. And that can also create that chronic stress. So I do believe our brains have drastically changed in like the past even 15 years. And I think about all different types of people that have lived all different walks of life,
Hmm.
from like the poorest to the wealthiest to the people that have done obviously terrible crimes. It's interesting if we were to examine the brain, what that would look like.
Yeah, they should send their brains to the Netherlands to
Yeah,
explore.
well, I'm gonna look into it.
Yeah, I think it's there, but yeah, I think it's called just Brain Institute. But I agree, and I think was it the Times or some like international media? I think they assigned the word of the year as doom scrolling, and here in Ukraine, the doom scrolling is like hits different because you're constantly consuming the news in Ukraine, and I think it's actually quite a local thingy. We do not read news outlets. We do not, and I'm generalizing here, of course, but mainly people to not read newspapers or even they do not go on media websites. We would just have the messenger and the media represented there on the messenger, or like a news blogger you would follow on Telegram or WhatsApp. Telegram is like a local alternative to a WhatsApp messenger, and all the people use it. And you would get your news on there, and it just never stops. And the difference here, and why I'm stopping on this so much, is just when you go to a website, this is you initiating an action. Like you will sit down and go, let me check the news. And you go on there and you see what's happening. And here you let the news in your life 24/7 because it's always pushes. It's always a push notification. Something's happening. And imagine there is an attack going on. your phone is constantly popping with everything. And here it's a very delicate line in between what you might think is safety, because you need to be notified of what is flying over your head. But then at some point you just get oversaturated with news and you just can't handle it. To me, I limited usage to like maximum 5 news outlets and those channels groups on Telegram. For instance, for my partner and for many of my friends, it is different. They would constantly get notifications. It's just different. People's brains worked differently. For me, I get tired from way too much information, but for them, their anxiety, I think, maybe is higher. And for them, they prioritize safety here more. They'd be like, okay, I might be tired from this. Of course, I'm not enjoying my phone constantly buzzing, but I'm afraid to miss something crucial. What if there is a ballistic attack happening, which could be happening at any second, really? So everybody decides for themselves, but many people end up in a situation when they are with their phone 24/7. They go to sleep to their phone in their hands and they wake up checking the news instantly because you are just anxious of what's happened overnight. You live like that. It's almost we are almost on our 5th year at this point. So I don't know how much we can handle, but let's check in a year if I'm still here.
Yeah, and I believe, isn't there an app as well that shows a map of kind
Yeah.
of
Do
where
you want me
the
to show it to you?
generalized? Yes, what was it called again?
It's just called Air Alert.
Air Alert.
Yeah, so here now, that's how it looks. That's a map of Ukraine. It's like mirrored. Where is Kiev? Here is it there. Let me see. This is Kiev here in the north center. And now you can see there is an alert in east regions. No alert in Kiev, but we did have one just before we started talking. Yeah, you have a map, and here on the map, let me zoom in. Here on the map, if you zoom in, you will see what kind of what kind of weapon they use. You click and you see that they tell you what kind of weapon. It says Nikopol, which is in Dnipro region where I'm from. There is a threat of artillery fire. So they say what kind of weapon it is. And yeah, you just choose your city and then you get notified whenever anything is heading your way, which
Yeah.
is usually overnight.
Yeah. And to add to that, I was looking through social media, and there's one particular gentleman that focuses heavily on like current events and news, more political stuff, has conversations. But he was in Saudi Arabia and he went to a like private trade conference and he was showing the drone technology, and my jaw dropped to the ground when I was looking at how advanced this is. And so I don't know if there's been much dialogue or conversation around what to be aware of, if you see something in the sky, or if there is anything significant in regards to the advancements of this technology.
Yeah, so again, I will tell you what I know, but I don't work in the defense tech. Unlike many people in Ukraine, this is the most growing industry. I think I dare say that here in Ukraine these days. But I definitely know that the war has changed, even from 2022 to where we're at now. And in many ways, it is a drone war. Russia strikes a couple hundred drones on Ukraine almost every night. Sometimes we would get attacks that are like 800 drones overnight. And their drones are specifically called Shahed drones. I think they are like parts from them. They are collaborating with Iran and China on. So they are distributed from there. But to mention on the drone technology, yes, I believe Ukraine is working and developing technology heavily as well. And we have those FPV drones, which is first point of view drones, and they are relatively cheap. And they are, if you are an good drone operator, you can have great like results in terms of destroying the enemy's weapon for a price of a relatively cheap drone. It's just like a drone, could be a drone kamikaze when you aim a target and it just flies down to the target, of course, gets destroyed on its own, but can also bring something with it. Yes, and many people who work in the army now, those drone pilots, and it's one of the newer army positions, but we need more and more of those people because drones are shown to be effective. And I think we have many like military advertisement now in the streets. And one of the city lights, I think it even said, "Let drones fight first." So they are betting on drones like as a first front line. And this is how they advertised their brigade, so they want drones to go first and like explore the field and make damage rather than people die in the front line. So of course drones are less expensive and they are not alive, which is one of the first thing that matters. But yeah, I was thinking the other day with my friend that what if there was no war? Probably we would have been delivering food with drones these days. But Ukraine is a very technological country. I'm sure we don't even know like 5% of what's been being developed now, because it's everything under like behind the closed doors and under NDAs. But definitely there is a big public discussion of usage of drones in the military, and like I said, defense tech industry is highly growing now. We have multiple startups who are working on drones, but they say no specifics for understandable reason. They're just like, we're working on drones, and nobody knows what that
Mm-hmm.
entails.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was looking in the tabloids recently, and I mean, it constantly is probably changing week by week and day by day, but I'm optimistic that
Yeah.
there's a lot of good happening, and it is in favor with everything as Ukraine continues to defend its front lines.
Yeah. Well, really not much to say here. It's like we have to. Like I said, I was just abroad and I'm impressed, and I'm trying to find a word here. Maybe annoyed. That would be the emotion I feel when you Uber somewhere in the US and they hear, of course, like your accent and start asking you where you're from, and you say from Ukraine, and then the first question person asks, "Oh, is there still a war? Like, how are you guys?" Or the next thing they ask if
Mm-hmm.
they know something, you say you're from Kiev, and they'd be like, but it's safe in Kiev, right? So obviously, Ukraine is not as much on agenda anymore, understandably, on the one hand, but then it is not safe in Kiev, and the war is still going on. And I feel like we still have to talk about it because people keep forgetting. And I'm grateful that, like, today I have a platform to talk about it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we stop fighting, we cease to exist. But if Russia stops fighting, like the war stops. It seems as obvious as that for us here, but maybe not to many internationals, because we know still how well Russian propaganda works. Not to say that people who like fall for it are stupid or anything. It's just that it's a masterpiece in a way. What can they achieve and how well and delicately they can brainwash people on a mass level for Ukraine to fight that. We call it informational war, informational side of the war. It is difficult because the resources are limited, and you might want to prioritize the battlefield rather than informational arena. Of course, we try and advocate for ourselves, but the Russian machine has been mastered through the years of USSR, and they have definitely more experience in there. So yes,
Yeah.
we have to stop fight. We have to continue fighting to continue existing.
Mm-hmm. I know I've been thinking a lot about like even what I'm seeing on my current algorithm and focusing so heavily on the war between Israel and Palestine. Obviously, war is not anything that, is encouraged by no means, but it's very interesting that the spotlight remains there. Even
Mhm.
in one of my last conversations, unless 50 plus people die, it doesn't make the headlines anymore. The Ukrainian stories do not make the headlines anymore. And even just more deep diving on, the power of social media and the power of honestly like propaganda, I guess, to some form or another. It's how information's getting fed and it's how people are receiving it. And yeah, unfortunately, Ukraine is definitely in the background. And I've had a few conversations with people and tried to educate as well that yes, the war still continues to go on. There's still winters where there's no power, there's no heat. I can't even fathom when I hear that, the power plants have been destroyed and somehow these people are cleaning up the rubble and rebuilding something so that people have heat and electricity. It's just still something so difficult for myself personally to even comprehend.
Yes. Yeah, and like before we started recording, I told you that I might have an outage. I actually was supposed to have one 50 minutes ago, but that's just to support your words that the people working in energy sector, they do their best, to say the least. I cannot find proper words to describe that. They are heroes of our of these days for us here in Ukraine, and they do their best to make those those cuts, those outages shorter. And if they were meant to cut it off at 8, they will try to cut it off at 9 or even 10 if they can. It just really depends on the day. For instance, if the day is windy or sunny, we might get some of the renewable energy sources to work better that specific day. So maybe the shortage can be shorter. But if no, of course, they would just try and stick to the graphic. I'll show you another app we have here actually might be interesting. So this is called the outage schedule. And here it is for today, for instance. You insert your address here, which we might want to blur, but I don't know. So there, wait, let me zoom in. Okay, so here you have a day, and then black is when there is an outage, and then white is when there is light. And like I said, at 8 we're supposed to have one, but we don't, at least not for now. And also what I want to mention here is that, again, thanks to the people who work in the energy sector, today is a weekend. So the graphic looks actually better than it will look tomorrow, because they do their best to give people more energy over the weekend because people stay at home. And in the weekdays, they will probably go to work, and then you will see a graphic of like 2 to 3 outages a day, each of 6 to 8 hours. So the graphic will be worse tomorrow. And yeah, people just have to adapt. It's either if you work from home, it's either you get those huge and expensive batteries, or you work from office, which is usually easier for people. But yeah,
Wow.
this is how it is now.
Yeah. And how do you think the overall like sense of hope you feel amongst the people? Is there
It is a difficult question for sure. And even me, like reflecting on my thinking, I go back and forth. I feel like many Ukrainians will relate to that. Some days it's difficult. Some days you just are cursing out loud and saying how much hate for everybody who has something to do with this war you have. It is hard to handle, especially in the winter time when it's cold and dark and looks like there is no light, both physically and metaphorically coming in. But then some days are better. Like we said earlier, you still have your like families, friends, like your support circle and things that fuel you from the inside. So some days that weighs out the rest. And I actually had an interesting conversation these days. I just came home from a trip like 3 days ago. And on the train from Warsaw to Kiev, which is currently, if you're lucky to get a direct train, which is a big hit, and usually the tickets are sold out, but somehow I managed this time. It takes 15 hours to go from Warsaw to Kiev. For instance, prior to war, it would be a 50-minute flight, so not even an hour. But I met a girl who is an Australian, but her parents are from Italy. And we were talking how it is quite hard to and she's coming to Ukraine. She invests in Ukraine. She invests in Ukrainian defense tech startups, actually. But the point is, her parents are from Italy, and we were talking about hope and how hard it is to hold on to it these days, especially for people who are staying in Ukraine. And she said that, of course, as a person who doesn't live permanently in Ukraine, it's hard for her to understand even the part of it. But she said about her parents who are from Italy, and who immigrated from there 2 years after the Second World War ended, when the things were bad. And they found a new life in Australia, and probably now they are doing well. But the point is, if they were to stay a few more years, Italy started and their village has become rich, everything has gotten better, and people could stay at home, live in a better life without a forced immigration. So in terms of if you look at it from a historical perspective, a few years does seem like you could still hold on to it. But when you look at it from a personal perspective, it is hard. I'm not gonna lie. Your level of energy, your level of productivity, everything just drops down, especially in the winter time. You just want to sleep all the time. No supplements or vitamins help. And it is a constant battle for resistance and staying resilient. But I keep saying to people who are not from here, they say, oh, Ukraine is so resilient. And I don't know if that makes me a bad person or whatever, but I usually reply to that I'd be happy to not be resilient. I'd be happy to not have experienced all of that made me resilient. I'd be happy to live a normal and naive life and to cry over a boyfriend or whatever. Like one of the kids we work with, she recently had a similar experience. She had her friend die from a Russian attack, and then she comes into school, and her classmate is like crying because of the math grade. So, like she didn't like her grade. And on the one hand, like you start undermining those experiences, you'd be like, you're so silly for laughing in the grade. But also when you think of it, like with a colder mind, you start, at least me, I'll be speaking for myself, I start being jealous for those people. I'm like, I wish I could cry for a grade, like, but we do have like deaths and not normal life conditions every day. And I'm curious if in some ways it would go back, or to at least to some extent, which is I don't have an answer for. I don't think any Ukrainian does. I think the closest I can have to an answer is I don't think so. At least not in the way it was for sure. We will still have scars, but I know that also time heals. And whenever I go abroad, which is quite often for like personal reasons and work, you do exhale at some point and go out to a restaurant and experience all of that light life
Yeah.
people have. And again, here I think it's very individual, but I have lots of hope that less people will experience this light of life as a burden to them, but will learn to live through it again, and to just enjoy this gift that we have of being still alive. At least now, another joke that we have here in Ukraine among my friends, at least now we are not afraid of getting old. You know how many women are struggling with that,
Yeah.
especially women, because of the pop culture and the patriarchy and whatever. Because in Ukraine, getting old is a privilege. Many people get killed prior to getting old. So if I get old, I'll be happy. I did.
Yeah. 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 I think healing, it looks so different for so many, and
Yeah.
especially enduring circumstances like this. For my family lineage, my mom's side, her parents were German World War II survivors. And it's been very interesting for me as a second generation
Hmm.
Canadian to witness that, to feel that, even from the German side of like the shame of being German and like what that looks like. And so it is very interesting. I think the healing is going to be multi generational. And I don't know
Yeah.
what that looks like, whether that's like people congregating and whether it's just strictly somatic healing. But I really hope that as Ukraine as a country, there's support, from other countries as well. And it is as quickly as possible
Hmm.
recovery once everything stabilizes again.
Yeah, yeah, I hope so too. And just a quick comment on Germany and how much of reconciliation is done. I've recently been to Berlin, I think last year, and I went to, I'm afraid to be wrong, but I think it was like a Jewish history museum or something. And of course, Germans up until these days, many people feel guilt, at least from the personal conversation I had. There was one thing that stood out to me specifically. There was this like a big plaque at the entrance to the museum which said, yeah, the plaque started with words, started with the Nazi Germany, World War II, yada yada yada. And it got me thinking about Russia, and that I do not see a world, and I'm happy to be wrong. I do not see a world in which at some point there is a Ukrainian History Museum in Russia where they admit to everything they did, to when they have paid all the reparations, to when they have started healing themselves. Fortunately, at least I cannot see that happening, for them to have such a plaque saying started by Russia or in Ukraine and then escalated to full scale war in 2022. And then for them to admit all the war crimes they did. Again, I'll underline, I'm happy to be wrong, but not in these circumstances, at least from like information we see and hear here. Not too many people have guilt because of what's happening there. But that's a whole different topic. I don't think we'll be diving in there now.
And hopefully we can discuss it at some point because, yeah, it is very interesting that just in general, I keep ruminating over this same piece of information. One
Hmm.
of one of these public figures that I read heavily her work, Brene Brown. She, has been talking about sitting with like the biggest tech CEOs and just discussing people that have the most power. And she talks about power being finite. And
Hmm.
some people feel like when they give their power away, they lose something. And
Hmm.
it's a very, in my opinion, it feels like a very outdated way of being because, sure, throughout history, that's how it's always been, but it's not the way forward.
Yeah, an interesting thought. For me, again, in Ukraine, things are currently very sensitive and they will continue be it even after like an active fighting stops or slows down or there is an actual ceasefire or something. And I'm worried in many ways of where our and the power they have will take turns. Because I feel like on the one hand, I am leaning more towards democratic way of ruling a country. This is my personal preference. But also on the other hand, I think every Ukrainian will agree that these days we have to prioritize our protection and defense. So that doesn't really align with all the like social discourse and all the democratic discourse. So at the end of the day, when we like have a public discussion of where to put the money? Do we put them towards education or culture, things I'd be willing to support personally? Or do we put them into fans, which will be a difficult choice for us here in Ukraine? And of course, I hope we can find some way of balancing it all out. But I think we will be a not typical country choosing like a one political direction to go to and sticking to that. I feel like we will be forced to find some way of compromise because there is no typical way for us to handle the power, and we will have to have multiple like people or stakeholders making decisions about Ukraine. And I think, again, a personal opinion only here, that one of those figures will have to be from military because their picture is currently very big and I do not see that changing anytime soon. And then after we count with them as a group, count with veterans and with all the families who have experienced the horrors of wars, not just firsthand as civilians, but as military people or involved, only then we can think of those, I'll put it quote unquote, softer industries like the Democrats would go for. So yeah, a very different discussion about power and about what to do with and how to reintegrate the territories. We will hopefully fight back that there is so many questions to be answered.
So going forward, is there anything that our audience could be informed in potentially supporting? Would it be having more of these kind of conversations? Would it be actually trying to send over goods? At this point, I think a lot of people are left quite directionless in how they can help.
Yeah, so there are many ways to support, as always. First thing I'd like for people to know is that support is needed. Different kind of support is needed. Sometimes if you like come across a Ukrainian wherever you live now, just a conversation will help. If this person is like currently abroad and is it physical safety, they might have a family or friends here whom they care of and they can be mentally here but physically there, which also I've been at that state. It's not the best state to be at, which whenever physical safety is provided, you're not necessarily not PTSD. But then actual ways to help people in Ukraine, I think we can leave if we can, like a few links below. There are reliable sources, there are reliable funds, and they are collecting money for different goals. Like some of them are educational, like we discussed today, some of them are supporting women. Again, something we touch upon. Others are more general, like supporting Ukraine fighting for their freedom. And those are the big funds that redirect money where they have to go right now. There are funds that collect specifically for drones, again, something we mentioned today, which is proven to be a very, very successful usage of your dollars and euros to actually destroy the enemy and the weapons they have. There are many funds that support medical system, and we haven't discussed it today, but currently in Ukraine, especially in many rural areas, they do not have access to medical care. So we have two ways of supporting people there. First is telemedical centers, is like when they would set up a room with the camera and the computer, and you can talk to a doctor that is currently in a different city. And the second one is medical brigades that actually come and can people run different kinds of tests. So there are organizations that collect specifically for that. And like me as a local, I can share some of those that are reliable. And spread the word. When you Uber and somebody asks you if there's still a war in Ukraine, you can definitely say that there still is, that Kyiv is not safe. None of the cities in Ukraine are safe. Like they say that Lviv is safe, for instance, which is in West Ukraine, but it's really not. Just the other day, they had a ballistic attack, and I think it was a Kinjal weapon leaning towards them, which is one of the hardest thing that the Russians can launch, and they did launch it on Lviv. I think it was destroyed by the air defense system, but still, they can get to any city in Ukraine if they want to. It will cost them, but they can very well do that. Just whenever there is a conversation, speak up and know that people need your support and very much appreciate it. If you ever want to come talk to people, it is possible. Currently, we have many hotels with equipped bomb shelters. So to some extent, you can be safe. Just don't think that we are like a destroyed country with a desert or a cemetery in all the main cities. No, we are still here. We're still fighting, and we will. And I think I'd like to end that with remembering that Ukraine is not just fighting for itself. We are in many ways fighting for all Europe and European values and geography and territory and everything Europe has. Because if Ukraine falls, Putin and Russian army won't stop there. I'm sure many of you know that very well at this point, and they've actively articulated where they want to go, and they will not stop at Europe. And Ukraine is doing a big, if I can put it that way, for many Europeans, for them to live that quote unquote silly easy life that they do. And I very much hope they appreciate what they have. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope we can follow up in another episode.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope that wasn't too heavy or sad, but it is what it is. If you joined, you knew what you signed up for. But no, jokes aside, I hope I shed light a bit for what's happening here. There was no outage today. That is good news. Ending up on a positive note, at least not now. And yeah, if anybody wants to like get to know Ukraine better, I'm also open to talk bilaterally with them.
Wonderful. And I will definitely add those links and
Yes,
your socials as well.
sure, sure. Thank you.